Hi, this is COMP1010 at the University of Manitoba. I'm Dr. Celine Latulip, and today I'm going to be talking to you about DoWhile loops. So the while loop that you're used to is what we call a top-tested loop. We check the expression at the top of the loop, and if it's true, we do the block of code. But there's also what we call a bottom-tested loop, and that's the DoWhile. Here's what it looks like. We have the keyword do, and then an open curly brace. And then we have our block of program commands, or the statement. And then we have a closing curly brace. Then we have the keyword while. And we have our condition that tests whether or not we want to continue to repeat this loop. And what's interesting to note is that there's actually a semicolon after this condition to sort of close this whole thing off. So that's what the syntax looks like. And here's a flowchart that explains how it works. We're going to do the program commands, the statement or the code block that's inside the loop once, and then we're going to check the expression, the condition, and if the condition is true, we're going to come back and do it again. And we'll keep on doing this, doing the code blocks, checking the expression. If the condition's true, we'll come back and do it over and over again. At some point, if it's false, then we leave the loop. So they're really similar, but there is one important difference. So in a while loop, we check the condition or the expression. If it's true, we run the code block, and then we do this again. And we can keep on doing that many times until we check that expression, and when the expression evaluates to false, we exit the loop. The DoWhile loop looks pretty much identical. The big difference is we're going to run the code block once before we ever even check the expression. So no matter whether this expression ever evaluates to true, that code block will get run once. So in the while loop, if the expression is false and never ever becomes true, the code block will never be executed. And the DoWhile forces it to be executed at least once. So most of the time, we don't actually want this to happen. Most of the time, we want to be able to do a while loop and have the possibility that the code block inside it will never be executed. So the possibility of executing a loop 0 times is usually pretty essential. So most of the time we're going to use while or for loops, but every once in a while we want a DoWhile. It's important to note that you can take a DoWhile loop and turn it into a regular while loop. So here's a DoWhile loop we do, and then there's a statement, and then we have the while expression. We can turn this into a regular while loop by just having the statement first, then create the while loop with the expression, and then having the statement again. So the problem with this is that the statement or your code block appears twice, and that's bad style. We typically do not want to repeat the same code in our program without using a loop, unless we absolutely have to. So this is what we would call priming a loop, and we don't really want to have to do it. So we can just avoid doing this by using the correct type of loop. And so you can look at sort of the logic of this, and here's some nice programming if statement logic. So if the statement or the body of the loop must be done once, then use a DoWhile loop. Else, use a while loop or a for loop. So let's go through an example of when you might use this. So imagine in processing, we want to draw random small circles until we get one whose center is within margin pixels of either the left side of the canvas or the right side of the canvas. So we've defined margin, maybe it's 10 pixels, and we're going to keep on drawing lots of little circles. And as soon as the center of one circle is it within 10 pixels of the left or 10 pixels of the right, we want to stop. So in the body of the loop, what we want to do is get random width and random height and assign them to next x and next y, and then draw our ellipse, and the circle size might be 10 or 20. So we're going to draw lots of small ellipses in random locations on the canvas. We want to keep on doing this as long as next x, which is randomly where we're putting the circle, is greater than margin, so maybe margin's 10, and less than the width of the canvas minus margin. As soon as we get one that's not meeting that, we want to stop. So does the code block in the loop have to be done at least once? And the answer to that question is yes, because we can't tell if the circle is within 10 pixels or within margin pixels of the left or right side until we've actually got a value in next x. So this is where we want to use a DoWhile loop, because we need to have values for these variables that are part of the condition. So we're going to switch over to processing and have a look at this. So here's this example. We call it random circles. So we have a circle size of 20. We have a margin of 10. And we're declaring next x and next y up here at the top. We're going to do a setup. I've set the frame rate here to 1 so we can see this happening. So you could actually do this without doing an active processing script, but we like active scripts. So in our draw function, we're going to create a random color so that each set of circles is going to be different. So we're going to draw a bunch of random circles until we get one near the margin, and then we end our loop, and then we're going to come back into draw, pick a new color, and we're going to do it again. So in our do loop, we're going to assign to next x and next y. We're going to draw our ellipse, and then the while condition is checking that the value of next x is greater than the margin or less than the width minus the margin. So let's run this and see how it looks. Bunch of purple ones, bunch of green ones, bunch of blue ones. Okay, and so each time we're drawing a bunch of random circles, but we stop as soon as we get one that's really close to the margin on either the left or the right. Okay, and if we put this back up to like a frame rate of 30, you'll see that it runs crazy and it's kind of hard to tell what's going on. So sometimes adjusting the frame rate down can be helpful to figure out if your code is actually working. Okay, all right. So there is an implementation issue. If we had tried to write the code this way, which looks pretty similar, we've got circle size and margin and our setup, and then we have our draw. If we had declared next x and next y inside of this loop, then we run into a problem. And that is because these variable declarations, float next x, float next y, have scope that is defined by these curly braces. And then when we get down here to this test, it's actually saying that these are out of scope. Next x does not exist when I've clicked on that. So this is a common bug that you can run into with do-while loops. And so what we really have to do is the version that I just showed you in processing, where we initialize, or sorry, not initialize, we declare these variables outside, either above the loop entirely or as globals up at the top of the script. And this is actually really kind of a common bug, but a lot of people would actually consider this a flaw in the design of the language, because with for loops, we can have things declared inside of the round brackets, and then they're in scope within the curly braces. So it works fine there. And with do-while loops, it just doesn't. So it's a little bit inconsistent and a little bit problematic. If I was redesigning this programming language, I would allow this to be in scope here, even if it's declared inside of here, but that's the way it is. So, all right. So the solution to that is to, as I said before, declare next x and next y before the loop, or even as globals in your program. And so that's it for the do-while loop example. Hope that helps. Thanks for watching.